My name is Gabriel Fairman, and if you want to learn more about augmented translations and what they can do for you, stick with me till the end of this video. So when we talk about augmented translations, we're referring to an entire set of actions and activities that take place when a translator operates with an enhanced productivity environment such as BWX that is typically connected to large language models such as GPT in order to provide a much richer translation experience. So an example of this is translation smells. So when you're performing translation work in BWX and you are about to commit a segment, that segment, if you have this option turned on, this segment is going to process through translation smells, which is a semantic verifier. It's going to look for problems in meaning, and it's going to flag these problems to the translator, right? That's one example of this augmentation, right? Typically, without this augmentation, a mistake could have been committed without that mistake being flagged because we didn't have previously any kind of semantic verification during the translation process. So in a nutshell, the augmentation comes from this interaction between the translator and the large language model. And you may be asking, well, how is this any different than a traditional CAT or computer-assisted translation environment? Well, on the surface, it looks very similar, actually, right? Let's just take a quick recap on what a CAT environment looks like. You basically have text that gets parsed, and that text gets always compared to translation memory, to glossaries, which are basic different knowledge bases that are referred to the translator during the work, as well as potentially machine translation engines that can be plugged into these tools. On the surface, like I said, very similar concepts, except the CAT tool is operating purely syntactically. So the CAT tool, for instance, when it looks at the sentence, John has gone to the market, and compares that sentence to John went to the store, from a syntactic perspective, it's not going to find any kind of correlations between these sentences. So any kind of learning that was derived from translating the first iteration won't be leveraged for the second iteration. If you have, let's say, store in your glossary referred to as grocery store, and now you're referring to market, you're not going to establish also that semantic connection between store and market. They're going to be, from a syntactical perspective, entirely different worlds, right? So what happens during the translation process is, in a traditional CAT tool, the translator is left with a lot of the linguistic legwork. Now, in the paradigm that we're exploring, that's why we call it augmented. The whole idea isn't to replace the human talent, intellect, prowess, but really to enable it with a lot more capacity, a lot more productivity, a lot more reach, a lot more visibility, really, let's say, to turbocharge the human experience. Now, I understand that that's a very delicate thing to do because it's very easy to lose track or sense of where authorship begins and where authorship ends, right? If I'm being offered a feed that's nearly perfect, at least for my standards, and I commit it, am I still the author or am I just a human validator, right? And this new way of working, let's say, while it greatly enhances productivity, it does raise a lot of questions, such as authorship. Now, in my opinion, there is a deeper change that happens where the human is no longer just writing, just translating, just authoring. There's also a teaching component that takes place in this augmented reality. With every sentence that gets committed, now learning is taking place by the large language model. So this contextualization is further teaching. Let's say if I start to make more informal choices, the large language model is likely to suggest more informal choices back to me. If I teach it a certain term, it's going to try to use that term to the best of its abilities. And obviously, it won't always be perfect, but it's a major shortcut when considering what the alternative is, which is a ton of linguistic legwork, right? And when you think about human beings and their amazing ability to interpret and recodify culture, I think that's something that needs to be valued, appreciated, and treasured. And that's why we're not trying to at any point replace that, but enhance that. We're not just talking about words here. We can talk about a much broader range of metadata. So for instance, how often has this been translated in the past? In what context has this been translated? How has the sentence above been translated? The sentence below? The entire document? You can be very broad when it comes to the context, right? Who translated this before? What are their quality scores and records? What's the traceability of a given word? How often has it been approved? And so on. How often does it show up? So there's all these different elements that are taken into account in this blending process that takes place by the large language model. Now, if I compare myself, for instance, against a large language model for this blending process, I'm sure that the large language model is going to beat me 100% of the times. I will never be able to crunch broad amount of information reliably better than a large language model. Now, when it comes to critically discerning the information that's being fed to me and being the guardian or the gatekeeper of language, I still believe in myself over the large language model any day, at least for now, at least for GPT-4 reality. I still believe in myself as that gatekeeper, and that's the reality that we're trying to push for, because even with future iterations of GPT or other even potentially more powerful large language models, we believe that the human being can still and should essentially have essential value to the production of meaning. Now, when we talk about augmented translations, there are lots of different actions that are under the umbrella of BWX and these augmented activities, let's say, or actions. But it's learning and it's adapting as they move along. Another example is what we call translation smells, which I mentioned earlier in the video, which is a semantic verifier. So translation smells is able to pick up on a very wide range of errors. It's able to pick up on mistranslations, additions, omissions. It's able to pick up on gender bias, wordiness. It's able to pick up misspellings, missing tags, any very wide range of potential translation mistakes. So the translation smells, it acts almost like a brake in this process, where like guardrails, where I know that I can go faster than I previously did because the more glaring, silly mistakes that I used to make are now no longer going to be mistakes, because I'm being aided by this augmented reality in which I'm performing the translations. Another good example of this augmentation, and this is something that I particularly love, is the tag fixing. So the tag fixing can be very powerful because that's one example of very laborious, tedious, repetitive work that can drive me mad when I'm translating. The tag fixing instantly gets rid of that work and ensures that the tags present in the source are also present in the target. Another example of something that I believe GPT does better than me is proofreading. I can ask GPT to proofread any given segment, and it'll ensure that typographically or syntactically there won't be any mistakes present in that text. And again, it's more reliable than my eyes are at catching mistakes. I particularly love another action that we have, which is the alternative suggestions, not just because it proposes alternative suggestions, but because it explains the rationale behind these suggestions, and saving countless hours of work. And I don't necessarily have to agree with the categorization. I could always override it. So I feel very comfortable that I'm in command as the translator. I'm still the author, at least I feel that way, but I'm just being enhanced by this continuous interaction is arbitrated between BWX, myself, and a large language model. Now, a question that I get often is, well, what about hallucinations? And we hear a lot about these questions when it comes to large language models. Part of the beauty of what we've done is that we've really restricted the role of the large language model as an arbitrator of context. And in this role, we see very little hallucinations. You see very little unexpected results. They do happen occasionally from time to time, but even when they do, they're very mild and timid. They don't seem like hallucinations. It just seems like, well, maybe it should have caught here something that it didn't, or maybe it's suggesting a change that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but it doesn't feel like, oh my god, this large language model is just hallucinating. And this brings me perhaps to the most important point of this augmentation is, what does it do for a translator? Well, it allows a translator to go exceedingly fast while maintaining their levels of quality, often even surpassing them. So if you think about it, right, as you get rid of these lower level linguistic tasks like cross-referencing a ton of material, like looking at past translations, like performing very basic comparisons between what the fuzzy match is versus what the new content says, looking for orthographical mistakes in the translation process. When you think about all of that being taken away, you have a lot more mental bandwidth for higher editorial faculties to take place. As the editorial faculties, they have greater bandwidth and space. They tend to elevate the quality of the translations that are taking place, because now I have a lot more bandwidth to think about what's the tone that I'm using, who's the audience for this, who am I talking to, am I using the right diction, the right syntax, the right tone. I have more time to research, I have more time to read relevant material, to produce additional context in my mind, to ask questions, to validate things, to run queries. So all this beautiful mental real estate gets opened up by this augmented translation process. So in a nutshell, VWX starts very low subscription prices. Our lowest tier for an individual translator is $7 a month for a yearly subscription. So we're talking about a very small investment, actually even smaller than the subscription for GPT itself, that allows you to produce translations at scale very reliably, very compellingly, and most importantly, in my opinion, with a lot more peace of mind. I personally become extremely fatigued over time when translating large volumes of content, and I feel just a lot more at ease, a lot more capable, with a lot more mental real estate available to keep track of different things that to me are super important, and I love it. So thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for more, and remember to subscribe if you like this video. Take care.